Hello everybody, good morrow to the day and first my bed hair. This is what happens in the morning at the moment. I've got my coffee. Hello. Yeah, I was editing my this video and on the day that I recorded it, I had received some mild bad news about my job, and when I was editing the video together, I just couldn't help noticing that I was looking a bit dead behind the eyes, and I just wanted to, because I can't really be bothered to record the whole thing again. This is the problem, Ben. This is why you don't do, monthly. This is why you have to do monthly wrap-ups, because otherwise we get into this situation anyway. So yeah, so I couldn't be bothered to do it again. But just to let you know that I'm actually I'm fine despite my unhinged hairdo. I'm fine. But yes, because this channel is called Doom Antidote, it's not called Doom and Gloom. I thought I'd just, I don't know, say that even though I'm looking a bit dead behind the eyes, like, I am very much okay. So yeah, hope you enjoy. My hair continues to be a source of entertainment and frustration to me. I don't know why I haven't cut it yet, but there we go. Hello everybody, my name is Ben. And today we have a bit of an unexpected wrap-up from yours truly at this point. I was planning on doing this at the end of August and doing like a summer wrap-up, kind of Ali Smith-esque, keeping up my Ali Smith schedule. But I've read some pretty hefty titles this month. I've read 12 books altogether, and I thought, well, I'd rather have space to kind of talk about them properly, so here we are. So it's a July wrap-up. So yeah, June was interesting in that the first 3 weeks maybe I didn't really read very much, and that's kind of for obvious reasons, and that's the world was in a bit of turmoil, as it still is at the moment. The pandemic being as it is, and the Black Lives Matter protests, police brutality. Yeah, it was just a lot to think about and to worry about and to kind of take in. So I kind of had a bit of a reading slump. But I picked it up again and I've managed to read 12 books. And as I say, they're pretty kind of hefty titles, so we'll see how we get on in talking about them. So the first book I read to kind of get me out of my reading slump is a really nice book. It is The Phantom Tollbooth by Norton. I love this book. So this is a children's book, but like all very good children's books, it doesn't sort of pander down to kids, so you can read it as an adult, I hope. But no, this is the equivalent of a literary hug. It's kind of, it's a very quirky, very peculiar little story about this little kid called Milo who ends up travelling to the Kingdom of Wisdom, and who goes on these very strange adventures with these strange characters into Digitopolis and Dictionopolis. But yeah, this is really, really nice book. It's very, very strange and very, very quirky. But as I say, it's just, it's the equivalent of a literary hug for me, I think. And it got me back into reading again because I read a couple of very hefty non-fiction titles. So the first one I read was Natives by Akala. So Akala is a hip-hop artist and a rapper. And in the UK, he's kind of known as a sort of like a political commentator, and he's done some very well-known appearances on various panel shows and debate programs and stuff, like Question Time and Good Morning Britain and stuff like that, very often talking about race and about class and stuff like that, and very often kind of running rings around far-right people. It's kind of quite interesting to watch. And that's the same with this book. This is Natives, Race and Class in the Ruins of Empire. And it's a really, really fascinating book it's sort of partly an autobiography a little bit, but it's also sort of like a political history book about the UK, particularly sort of post-World War II, kind of looking at the disintegration of the British Empire and how that kind of affected the class system and how that affected attitudes towards race in the class system of the UK. The bits that I really kind of found fascinating were the autobiographical bits, and he mainly talks about his experience in the education system and his kind of run-ins with police. And it was interesting to me just because he's not that much older than me, Akala. He's about 3 years older than me, I think. But it was interesting just to kind of like comparing my experience and his experience. Yeah, it just kind of put that dreaded P word, it put my privilege into perspective, and I mean, we have completely different backgrounds, but yeah, I was just really interested to read about it. I mean, there's some really kind of horrible experiences that he's had with racist teachers and stuff. Also, this turned out to be quite a sort of pertinent read because right at the beginning of the book, he talks about protests that were happening in the 80s when he was, a kid. And of course, at the time I was reading it, kind of at the end of June, and now there are a lot of protests, to do with police brutality and everything. So yeah, so when I was starting to read this book, it just was really pertinent. It's not that old. I think it was only published kind of a couple of years ago, but still, it's just, if you're going to read it, then I'd really recommend reading it now, whilst things are going on. So yeah, very, very high recommend this. And then another non-fiction book I read was James Baldwin, The Fire Next Time. I'm not going to pretend that I have sort of finished my understanding of this book, because I haven't. Yeah, so basically it's 2 essays. One is sort of shorter. It's a letter to his nephew, and it's a letter kind of preparing him for a life as a black man in 60s America, and kind of warning him against what's going to happen and stuff. And in the second essay, yeah, it's a longer one, and it talks about his experiences with religion, namely sort of Christianity, and how when he was young, he was kind of terrified of sort of ending up on the streets, and so to kind of ward against that, he turned to Christianity in quite a big way, and he became a youth pastor. But as time kind of went on, he became more and more disillusioned with how Christianity, as a sort of structure and as a whole, sort of treated black people. And, because white people were worshipping the same God, it was almost like a white God who kind of didn't actually care about or protect black people in the same way that it was protecting and looking over white people. So he became more and more disillusioned with that, and eventually kind of separated himself from it. And then there's a large section where he talks about the Nation of Islam and how, which I didn't really know much about before, but and he goes for dinner with Elijah Muhammad, who was one of the leaders, I think, of the Nation of Islam. So he goes to dinner with these people, and they kind of, their whole thing is that they want complete autonomy. They don't want anything to do with white people anymore. They want their own states, and they want their own, they want their own power and stuff. And James Baldwin, he kind of it's only on the car ride home that he sort of starts to be a bit skeptical about that kind of about that argument, about the logistics of it and where's the money going to come from and everything. His conclusions is where I need to kind of sit with this book a bit more, because I think what he's wanting is he's wanting an integration, and he's wanting black and white people to respect and love each other. Obviously, he argues that the only way that you're going to get rid of racism is when white people really start to love themselves and respect their own selves. Yeah, because if you think about it, like, no one who is actually secure in themselves has to oppress someone else in order for themselves to feel good about themselves, if that makes any sense at all. So yeah, his I think the main sort of thing is that it is down to white people to sort out racism, which it makes sense. But as I say, I need to kind of sit with this a little bit more and to understand his argument a bit more. It's the first James Baldwin book I've read, and of course, he's he's just a really engaging and kind of fascinating writer and powerful writer. So, and as we see, I did read another James Baldwin book. But yeah, I'm going to read and sit with this a bit more before I talk about it more. So now we come on to novels, and the first novel I read was Sula by Toni Morrison. I had never read a Toni Morrison book before. I know that the two sort of big ones are Beloved and Song of Solomon. I don't know what sort of drew me to this, but yeah, I read Sula, and oh my goodness gracious, she's an amazing writer, isn't she? The language in this is just fabulous. So it's a very unusual novel, and it's got an unusual kind of style to it. So basically it centers around Sula and Nell, who are these kind of childhood friends who grow up in kind of around the 1920s in a segregated Ohioan town. And yeah, it talks about friendship and betrayal and family, love, there's all those sorts of things within the context of this segregated town. So you've got like racism and stuff in there as well. Sula herself, she's a really kind of fascinating character. I wouldn't go as far to say that she's a sociopath, but she does kind of she does lack a certain amount of empathy, which you would sort of require of someone, particularly of a friend, you know. So yeah, she sort of lacks a certain amount of empathy, and that kind of it leads to kind of difficult situations in the future when they're adults. The novel, it goes into very unexpected kind of shocking, dark, that's not the right word, but sort of shocking places. And I was kind of a little bit unsure about it. There's a I won't sort of give away anything, but there's a murder that happens, and it's quite a kind of sort of taboo murder. And it kind of comes completely out of the blue, and I was like, where are you going with this, Toni Morrison? Because it's sort of not sort of discussed afterwards, and I'm like, what? But about 10 or 15 pages later, it's sort of finally explained what that murder was all about, and I was like, ooh, okay, all right, Toni Morrison. Yeah, I was like, Toni Morrison, you can do whatever you like now. I trust you and your storytelling. So yes, it's a bit of an unusual novel, a bit of a kind of like novel, if that makes sense. Yes, I'm definitely going to read more Toni Morrison before this year is done. So yes, I recommend it. Right, so next up, I read a play, and I read Riot Act by Alexis Gregory. Now I have to sort of declare an interest in talking about this book because I do know the writer Alexis. I hope he doesn't mind me talking about this play, but I only have nice things to say about it. So this is a verbatim play, i.e. it's a play that is made up of real speech from real people, and it was a kind of fascinating thing that he did. So so this is 3 monologues from 3 separate men that he interviewed. And basically what he did, he interviewed these 3 gay men who have been involved in some kind of protest for gay rights in some way. So first one, Michael Anthony Nozzi, who was actually at the Stonewall riots. And so I think he was about 17 when the Stonewall riots happened, and he was kind of on the ground right there, sort of witnessing what was happening and being involved in what was happening. And so that is a really, really fascinating monologue, as you can imagine. Then you have Lavinia Kopp, who is a drag queen, a British drag queen, and she was kind of involved with the Gay Liberation Front. And then there's the last one is Paul Burston, who is a journalist and activist, and he did a lot of kind of AIDS activism in the 80s and 90s. I watched it twice. I thought it was really, really powerful and very, very it was just really, really good. It was just an amazing piece of theatre, very, very stripped back. It was just him. Alexis performed it as well. So yeah, what he did with these
he interviewed these men, and then he kind of curated their answers into these monologues, and then he performed the monologues. So yeah, the first monologue with Michael Anthony Nozzi is obviously very, very interesting, just because, you know, just to hear about what that night was like in 1969. And it's interesting because he doesn't, Michael, he doesn't sort of mention the usual names that are usually mentioned with the Stonewall riots. You know, there's lots of myths about what happened that night and who did what and all the rest of it. And obviously there wasn't any social media back then, and there were hundreds and hundreds of people there, sort of. So obviously there's been a lot of sort of contradictory things, but from his perspective, it's just fascinating because he has lots of details about the night, witnessing the violence and stuff, and just the chaos of it. It's just really, really interesting. All three talk about the AIDS crisis, and there's some really, really moving and very, very sad things, particularly from Paul Burston, just talking about the friends that he lost and just how devastating that time was, you know, going from funeral to funeral. I think people who, you know, like sort of my generation and younger, it's very kind of difficult to sort of imagine what that was like. And this is just very, very, there's a lot of sort of moving stuff. Also, one thing that I remember sort of stood out for me when I watched it, and it kind of stuck out for me when I read it. I think Paul Burston talks about how during the AIDS crisis, lesbians really kind of like stepped up and kind of supported the gay men, you know. And he makes this very interesting point that would it have been the same if lesbians were going through, you know, a huge crisis like that? Would gay men have stepped up and helped them in the same way? And it's kind of like, it just gives you pause for thought. I really, really recommend it as a text to read, even though it's a play. Obviously, it has been dramatized, and there is a sort of note at the beginning, you know, sort of certain names and stuff have been changed and stuff. But you know, it's still verbatim, so it's still these men's words. And if you are sort of thinking, oh, it's a bit exploitative, it's not. I mean, when I went to watch it, two of the three men were there, and you know, it was sort of like it was more of a celebration of them. It wasn't, you know, anything else. So yeah, I'd really recommend it. Okay, next up, I read a 19th century classic. I read The Moonstone by Wilkie Collins. Terrible cover. Terrible cover. I don't know what this is about. I bought this in January from a charity shop, and I sort of saw it there. I was like, oh, The Moonstone by Wilkie Collins. That's a classic, isn't it? I'll have it. And it's been sitting on my desk for months and months and months now, since January, and it's always kind of been like The Moonstone by Wilkie Collins. And I'm like, no, I'll get to that later. And then I sort of later comes around, it's like The Moonstone by Wilkie Collins. I'm like, no, I don't want to read The Moonstone by Wilkie Collins. But eventually it went to The Moonstone by Wilkie Collins, and I was like, all right, fine, I'll read The Moonstone by Wilkie Collins. So yes, this is about it's kind of like the OG detective novel about who stole the diamond. So I ended up really, really liking this book. It's quite a hefty one. It's about sort of 500 pages. But I ended up really, really liking it. It is a bit silly, but I did like it. So yes, it did take me a while to get into the groove of it. Like the first 100 pages, I just wasn't very invested in it. So the diamond, the Moonstone is a diamond that has basically been stolen, sort of British museum style, from India, and there are these three Indians who it has sort of spiritual, religious significance, and they kind of want it back. So they sort of they trace the diamond back to England, and at the beginning of the novel, it's gifted to this young woman called Rachel, I think. And the very same night, the diamond is stolen, and it causes this big kind of like hoo-ha about it, because it's, you know, priceless and stuff. And for the first sort of 100 pages, I was like, I don't actually mind. I don't actually mind that this diamond has gotten stolen. If the Indians have got it, I don't mind. There are sort of elements of this book that are problematic, but yeah, we'll get to that. So yeah, I wasn't sort of too invested in it sort of in the first 100 pages, but once Sergeant Cuff arrives, then things start to get a bit more interesting, and yeah, of course, it's not just about the loss of the diamond. The diamond! It's about kind of the relationships. It's got a very interesting narrative structure, this book. It's made up of kind of witness statements, and, you know, sort of novelized witness statements. And I think the first sort of 200 pages of the book are from the butler, from his kind of point of view, and I liked that kind of perspective. It's that kind of upstairs, downstairs. You only sort of hears parts of arguments and stuff, and you know that those arguments are going to be sort of you're going to find out what's going on with them later on in the book. So I kind of like that. So yeah, so once Sergeant Cuff arrives, then things start to get a bit more interesting, and there's like kind of like a horrific death that happens and stuff. And then kind of the second half of the book is made up of a lot more different people's witness statements. And my favourite character I've read for a long time is Miss Clack. Miss Clack. She is fabulous. I laughed so much reading that section. What's her first name is amazing. Hang on, what is her first name? Drusilla Clack. Oh gosh, she's this she's kind of like a minor character, but she's kind of like this evangelical Christian, and she's got this whole thing about she wants to sort of save souls and stuff. And there's this older woman character who's kind of got a terminal illness, and so Miss Clack is kind of like determined to sort of win her to the fold before she dies. And she gives her this she offers her this big pile of books, these sort of terrible evangelical books about, you know, Satan and stuff. And she says, you know, please read these books. And this older woman's like, no, I'm not going to read those books. And so Miss Clack, she's sort of determined for her to read these books. And so she ends up kind of surreptitiously sort of placing the books around this older woman's house in like little places. And I was just like, oh my gosh, it's hilarious. I love her so much. Drusilla Clack. So yeah, there are really, really funny bits in the novel, and particularly in the second half. And there's some good old plot twists. I was sort of like, there's some good old plot twists in this. Towards the end, it does get very, very silly. And as I say, you know, there are sort of problematic bits about it. But I did enjoy it, and I would recommend it, definitely. I don't know much about his other work apart from The Woman in White, so I hope if it's anything like this, then I'm sure I'll enjoy it, because I did end up really liking this. The Moonstone by Wilkie Collins? Yes, do. If it sort of calls out to you like that, then do read it. Next up, I read Sense and Sensibility by Jane Austen. I talked about this. I talked about this at length in my Jane Austen ranking video. I don't know if I've got too much to add about it, other than I really enjoyed it. It's the last of my Jane Austen finished novels to have read. So now I have her juvenilia and her unfinished novels to read. And someone said that Sanditon is worth it, so I might have a look at it. Lots of people love Lady Susan, which is one of her short stories, so I might have a go at that. But yeah, what can I say? Sense and Sensibility, it's awesome. I really like it. Next up, something completely different. I read How to Get Filthy Rich in Rising Asia by Mohsin Hamid. I've read a couple of his books now. I've read The Reluctant Fundamentalist. Hang on. Yeah, I've read The Reluctant Fundamentalist and Exit West. And whilst Exit West is kind of like, he's still a really fascinating writer. He's just really sort of, the way he sort of thinks about things and writes about things is really interesting. This is kind of like an interesting book in that it's a novel in the second person, and It's a novel that's kind of masquerading as a self-help book, and it's kind of very meta. It kind of reminded me a bit of If on a Winter's Night a Traveller, just because it kind of the sort of the meta elements of it, sort of saying you are reading a book, you are reading a self-help book. But basically, it tells the story of this this man who starts off life in very, very poverty-stricken circumstances, and then slowly but surely he kind of works his way up to being filthy rich in rising Asia. There is a sort of like a central kind of love story. A love story. Yes, I really enjoyed it. It was kind of a very sort of quick, as all his novels seem to be. They're very short. You can get through them very, very quickly. He does some of his. Sometimes the way he writes is seems to me to be a bit kind of convoluted. There's like lots of long sentences with lots of commas and stuff. I think if you were an actor to to sort of read the audiobook of this, I think it would be quite interesting. But apart from that, it is an interesting book just because of the structure and form of it. And yeah, I'd recommend it. It's gone cold. I went to the gym for the first time in 3 months today, and I am suitably dead. Right, next up. Oh gosh, right. So I read a James Baldwin book kind of at the end of June, and after I read that, I sort of looked at his body of work, and this sort of shows my ignorance, but I did not know that James Baldwin wrote Giovanni's Room. I didn't know it. I knew that kind of Giovanni's Room was kind of like a seminal, for want of a better word, a seminal work of gay fiction. And I always sort of knew that at some point I'm going to read Giovanni's Room. But yeah, I didn't realise that James Baldwin wrote it, so I was like, I'm definitely reading it now. So I did. It is very, very powerful. I think one of the problems with reading this now is that we're kind of used to this kind of story where the sort of the gay love tragedy, if you like. So it's easy to kind of forget that this is kind of not the first, obviously, but this is kind of so revolutionary and kind of influential. It's about David, who is this American who has this kind of girlfriend, and she's off somewhere for some reason. I can't remember why, but she's off in Spain whilst David's living in Paris. And David, he's sort of dabbled with men before, but only in a kind of like a one night stand type way. But he goes to this sort of bar, which is a gay bar, but he goes to this bar, and behind the bar is Giovanni, who is this very, very good looking Italian man. And I was reading it and I was like, why can't this happen in real life? Why can't I go to Paris and get chatted up by a hot Italian man? That bit is just so kind of like, I want this to happen to me. I don't want, the internalized homophobia and the tragedy stuff to happen to me at all. But yeah, that bit, I'm just like, oh gosh, Mr. Baldwin, can you just stop with my heart? So yeah, I mean, just the writing in this is just like amazing. And there's this bit where one of the older gay men talks to David, and it does kind of feel like Mr. Baldwin is talking to me. I was just like, all right, I get it. Don't feel gay shame and everything. I get it. It is very, very powerful at the end, and the sort of the images. Oh gosh, the last sentence. Oh, flipping heck. Yeah, it is melodramatic, and it's, as I say, it's easy to kind of forget that just how revolutionary this was, and how kind of now I've read it, now I can see that lots of different people have tried to sort of copy this kind of thing. I think as as a community, as the LGBTQ community, we're sort of kind of yearning for more happy endings, I think, in recent times. But even so, I mean, I think this is, if you haven't read it, then obviously I just really, really recommend it because it is very, very powerful. His writing is amazing, and there were bits in it where I was just like, in a good way. So yeah, very, very high recommend. Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin. Right, this next book. I read A Brief History of 7 Killings by Marlon James. This won the, what was then called the Man Booker Prize in 2015. This is fabulous. This is a really, really good, it's just a really, really good book. It's, the title is a bit of a misnomer, because there's a lot of killings in it. So essentially it's about Jamaica. It's about Jamaica in the 70s. Well, it sort of revolves around this real life attempted assassination attempt on Bob Marley. Bob Marley himself is kind of like a very minor character. We're sort of more focused on the gang members and members of the CIA. There's some really kind of complicated politics that was happening at that time in Jamaica. Yeah, I mean, this is a literary novel with a capital literary novel, but it is not, I mean, that's not to say that it's dreary at all. It's really, really bold and exciting, and just like, I mean, it's a big old book. It's about 600 pages. No, it's nearly 700 pages, but I sort of read it very, very quickly. It's multi-narrated. I think we hear from about 10, 12 maybe different characters in the first person. And so we hear from certain gang members, gang leaders, CIA people. There's one really, really fabulous character called Nina, who I think she's had sort of a one-night stand with Bob Marley, and at the beginning of the novel she's quite she's just quite kind of not obsessed with him, but she wants him to help her get out of the country, basically. So yes, it is very, very violent. Oh gosh, I mean, it's just jam-packed full of murder, torture, rape, rape references, and it's quite a sort of brutal, tough read. Particularly, there's a few kind of death scenes in this book, and because it's sort of first person, you hear from characters being killed and dying in the first person, and there's some really, really horrific kind of moments. There's one character, for instance, who gets buried alive, and it's just like, oh gosh. And yes, there's some kind of wince-inducing violence in this as well, but it's not kind of gratuitous. I mean, it's just what it is. It's about gang violence in Jamaica, and then sort of moving on to New York, kind of like the drug lords and stuff. But it's really, really fabulous. I mean, I think this is definitely going to be one of my top 10 at the end of the year, I think, because I just really, really enjoyed it. Marlon James, the style of it is really, really fascinating. Sometimes, so there's no sort of quotation speech marks. Any kind of dialogue is indicated by a dash and then the dialogue. And Marlon James, he does kind of it's a novel where you have to work basically as a reader, and there's sometimes where he kind of throws you off a bit because you sort of think someone is talking, but then it turns out that the other character is talking, and so I was like a bit like, what? But yeah, it's just really, really original. The language in it is like very, very like whoa. It is a novel where you have to work as a reader, but it's kind of exciting and kind of page-turny enough for that to sort of not be a problem for me anyway. So yeah, definitely one of my top books I've read this year. Okay, next up. I might get a bit emotional talking about this book, but now that I've said that, I probably won't. So here we go. So I read The Nickel Boys by Colson Whitehead. This won the Pulitzer this year. And it is a really distressing, powerful book. So about kind of like the Jim Crow South and stuff. So it's about this young boy called Elwood, and he's really, really bright, kind of very intelligent, and he gets this place at a kind of prestigious college. And but on his first day, on the way to going to the college, he kind of gets mixed up in someone else's crime, and ends up being sent off to this reform school, and it's about the injustice of that, and this school, the Nickel Academy, is a hellhole. It's like this really, really horrible place where the boys are abused and just treated like dirt, and it's a segregated school, but the black boys are just they're just abused basically, and not only that, but there is not only is there a sort of daily risk of being beaten, but there's also a risk of being killed as well. The novel is based on a true story. It's based on this, I think it was called the Dozier School. It was this big old scandal that happened. It was this school in Florida, and they found they found lots of bodies there. So this is interesting in that it's very short. It's about 200 pages, and there is a version of this book which is like a 700-page epic. But it's interesting that Colson Whitehead has chosen to keep it very, very lean and very kind of to the point. I read this I don't often read books in a single day, but I read this in a single day. And similar to James Baldwin's The Fire Next Time, there is a message towards the end which I found so kind of profound and sort of almost too deep. I mean, I know deep as a word is kind of, I can't think of any other word because it is deep. It's just this, I couldn't really get my head around it. And basically it's this idea of having love and compassion for your own oppressors, which is just really, really like, I just couldn't, I was just like, but they're torturing you and stuff, and there's killing, and it's just, but it's that thing of, it reminded me a bit of Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, that idea of keeping your own dignity in the face of suffering. Yeah, it's just really, really, for want of a better word, deep, and it really kind of got me thinking and got me upset and stuff, and yeah, I'd recommend it. It's I did read a bit about the school that it's based on afterwards, the Dozier School, and just, the fuckers, they just, it's just unbearable to think about that school. Sorry. Yeah, it just talks about the kind of this young boy kind of really sort of keeping his dignity and keeping his humanity and hope, and not letting himself sort of get destroyed, his spirit getting destroyed by it all, by all the horribleness of it. And just a really, 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 really sad ending, but very, very powerful. So I definitely recommend it. And the last book that I read, again, I read this in a single day because it was very short, but I read The Friend by Sigrid Nunez. So this is kind of a really interesting one. This is a novel which is all about grief, and it's a very sort of reflective, meditative book. So there's this very famous author who dies, and the narrator of this book, she gets kind of saddled with this author's dog, this great big Great Dane, and it's about kind of how this woman and this dog kind of slowly but surely work up a friendship. It sounds very trite and kind of like predictable as a story, but it isn't, just because of the style of it and the way that it talks about grief, and the grieving process is kind of mixed up with the structure of the book as well. It's so there's lots of kind of separate paragraphs talking about sort of different things, and you can sort of imagine the narrator kind of like going from sort of memory to memory. And yeah, it's a really gorgeous story towards the end. It's not kind of, I don't think it's a book for everyone. I think some people might not like the style of it, and also it's because it's about writing as well, and about the sort of it's about the role of writing within this kind of context with grief and with bad experiences and stuff. But I did enjoy it. And I did think towards the end was really gorgeous, and you know, it's a predictable book, but at the same time it isn't, just because it is very reflective and meditative, and I think it's an interesting book, kind of not as expected as you might think it is from what the premise is, but yeah, I did enjoy it.
Hello. So that was my June-July wrap-up. I hope you enjoyed. Yes, next month I'm planning to read Jane Eyre, or Jane Flipping Eyre as I like to call it. What else? Right now I'm just about to start The White Tiger, so that'll be interesting. The Booker Prize has just been released, and I'm not really a big Bookerite, but yeah, it's kind of interesting. I've been watching, you know, the regular booktubers who like to talk about that, and find that interesting. So yes, here we go, and here we are. I hope that you're okay. I hope that you take care of yourselves and each other. I'm going to endeavour to take care of myself and my other. And yes. In case you want it, here's me dancing around my kitchen to the theme of Only Connect. Bye-bye.